the God, you know my every thought, and you know my ways, the path on which I walk, and you know me better than I know myself. You've known me longer than anyone else. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, and I can't even understand it. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. I can't even comprehend it, but I know you see. Oh, this I know you see. Oh, I could walk where men may never tread, or plunge the depths where I could make my bed. But I never went hide and seek. You're so good at finding lost in the misery of the depth of your love for me. Just as knowledge is too wonderful for me, and I can't even understand it. Knowledge is too wonderful for me. Oh, and I can't even comprehend it, but I know you see. Oh, this I know you see. And even where my world is shaking, Lord, your hand will hold me still. Even where my world is shaking, your hand will hold me still. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made.
Hello! Welcome to Theology Chat with Chumpy. This is something we decided to try starting this week, mainly because everything's different, so we're trying something new. So, What is Theology Chat with Chumpy? Well, Pastor Melissa is doing the Sunday sermon on the live stream, and what this is hopefully going to be is we're going to take the sermon that she gives on Sunday morning, and we're going to try and define maybe some terms that she uses. There's a lot of terms and just words that people use in Christian circles, and we're going to just take some opportunity to maybe define some terms. We're going to take some time to talk about the theological concepts that she was preaching on Sunday, and we're also going to maybe answer some questions that maybe came up from the sermon. That maybe Pastor Melissa was preaching about something and you said, what about, does that mean this, or is that something completely different? We asked after the sermon, like, if you have any questions, go ahead and post them on our Facebook, and we'll try and address those as much as we can. And so next week, going forward, if you have questions about the sermon, please let us know, because it'll give me something to talk about, for one thing. So that's what we're hoping to do with this, and like everything else that's going on right now, this is kind of an experiment, and we'll see how it goes, and hopefully this is something that is educational and is meaningful for you all. And let's jump in. So this past Sunday, Pastor Melissa was talking about the story in the garden after Adam and Eve ate the apple and they realized they were naked. Now, one of the things that happens in there is they're hiding, and this was the main thrust of the story that she talked about on Sunday. They're hiding because they knew that they did something wrong. And then God comes and he looks for them. And he says, Adam, where are you? And it's one of those things, it's like, as a parent, when you you know your kids did something, it's one of those things, like, what did you do? And I know what you did, but I want you to tell me. That sort of thing. But God comes looking for them in the garden. That's kind of the point that I'm trying to get across. And so the whole idea that she was talking about there was this prevenient grace is the word that we use in the Nazarene Church. That God was going out to them, even though they were stuck there in their sin. So that's kind of the theological point that we were getting on this Sunday. Prevenient grace. Now, what is grace? We've talked about grace before at church, and so I hope that you've heard this definition before. Is grace is unmerited favor of God. Like, we don't deserve to have God's favor, but he gives it to us anyway. That is grace. And so prevenient grace, well, prevenient means literally grace. Prevenient grace literally means grace that comes before. So this is grace that God gives us before anything else, really. That's kind of like a background idea for what prevenient is. And so if we look at the manual, if you're not familiar with the manual, the Church of the Nazarene has a book called The Manual. It's a nice little handy-dandy little black book. It's a book that has basically all of our doctrines, all of our practices, all of that stuff in one tidy little package. And so the Articles of Faith is our main doctrinal statement. What is our doctrinal statement? And one of the items in there is Article 7 that talks about prevenient grace. And so I'm going to read that for you, and then I'll break that down. So it says, we believe that the grace of God through Jesus Christ is freely bestowed upon all people, enabling all who will to turn from sin to righteousness, believe on Jesus Christ for pardon and cleansing from sin, and follow good works pleasing and acceptable in his sight. We also believe that the human race's creation and godlikeness included the ability to choose between right and wrong, and that thus human beings were made morally responsible, that through the fall of Adam they became depraved so that they cannot now turn and prepare themselves by their own natural strength and works to faith and calling upon God. Now, everybody got that? I'm going to kind of break that down for us, hopefully, into more manageable pieces. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. It says, we believe that the grace of God through Jesus Christ is freely bestowed upon all people. To who? Well, to everybody. God bestows his grace to everyone. And so, is that for you? Yes. Is it for your friends? Yes. Is it for your neighbor that you can't get along with? Yes. God bestows his prevenient grace to everyone. Now, why? Oh, Melissa says I am echoing. Let me put on my headphones and see what that sounds like. Does that sound any better? Is that any better? Check 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. Ah, there we go. Okay. Linda says, yes, that sounds better. So, maybe that's why people wear their headphones when they do this stuff. Okay, so, where was I? Thanks for bearing with me, by the way. So why does God give us this grace? It says there, to enable all who will, A, to enable us to turn from sin to righteousness, B, to believe in Jesus Christ for forgiveness, for pardon, and from cleansing from sin, and C, to follow good works pleasing and acceptable in his sight. In other words, to empower us to live the life and the calling that God has for us. That's why God gives us this prevenient grace to draw us back to him so that we will accept his gift of forgiveness and reconciliation. So, the next part then we go into, it says, we get that, pull it up here. It says, we also believe that the human race's creation and godlikeness included the ability to choose between right and wrong. In other words, we're responsible for what our choices are. Humanity is responsible for the choice that we made as humanity to take the fruit in the garden. Humans, sorry, let me pick back up where I dropped off there. Human beings were made morally responsible. In other words, we were created to be responsible for what we did. And that through the fall of Adam, and that's the original sin that we talked about last week, humanity became depraved so that they cannot now turn and prepare themselves by their own natural strength and work to faith and calling upon God. In other words, original sin broke everything about our nature, pretty much. Humanity now has what we call a sinful nature. And when you hear that term, sinful nature, that just means that humanity has this bent towards sin rather than towards God. We were created in perfect relationship with God in the garden, but then original sin broke that, and now we have this bent towards sin. I've heard you'll hear it around the harbor a lot, that all analogies break down at some point. And so, but the analogy that I like the best about the sinful nature, is that it's like driving a car that needs a front end alignment. You can keep it going straight for a little while, but then if you happen to let go for the wheel any amount of time, it's going to want to veer off the road. That's kind of what a sinful nature is like. We want to be going towards God, but this sinful nature keeps trying to steer us off the course. And so that's what we have now as a result of original sin and the fall. And so since that's our nature, it carries on. It goes on there and says we're literally unable to reconcile ourselves to God. We can't do it on our own. That's why Jesus came to act on our behalf. It says in Romans chapter 5, verses 6 through 8, actually, it kind of points that out to us. So let me pull that up for you. It says, "You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person. Though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us." In other words, we couldn't do anything for ourselves to make things right with God. And so he came and he was able to do that. We were not. Jesus was. That's why he came. And so to go back to prevenient grace, we need God's prevenient grace because we're unable to turn to him otherwise. To summarize all of that, prevenient grace is God reaching out to us, wooing us, and enabling us to come and turn to Jesus because we're completely unable to do it if we were left to our own. Now, Pastor Melissa pointed that out in her message on Sunday. She talked about Genesis chapter 3, where God came to Adam and Eve, even though they were in sin. He didn't leave them sit there on their own. God went to them. They weren't able to go see him. He went to them. The same thing goes for us. In every sin, in every relapse, in every possible way we could turn from God, God continues to pursue us. He went after Adam and Eve. He goes after you. He goes after everyone. He is constantly reaching out to people. That is prevenient grace. God is always wanting to have us come back to him, and he's always making that first effort, reaching out to us. Pastor Melissa said on Sunday, she said, "This is God's good and perfect grace. It moves before anything else. God always acts first, and then we respond to him. Anytime you feel like God is putting something on your heart, that God put that there first. You're just responding to him because our nature is that we need him to be doing that." In fact, she talked about us being created with a God-shaped hole in our hearts. Now, she attributed the quote to St. Augustine. That's debatable, but I went back and actually looked up some of Augustine's writings. St. Augustine is one of the early church fathers, and he had a quote that is not actually the same thing that she said, but the sentiment is definitely there. He says, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." I really like that because I think that speaks to a lot of people's stories where until they come to a point where they find their place in Jesus, they're restless. Like they don't know what to do with themselves. Like they go searching for all these things, and that's where this idea of a God-shaped hole comes in, because it was put there that God, reaching out in his prevenient grace, he put that there so that we would long to have him in our lives, that we would want to have him working in our lives. That yearning is God's prevenient grace calling you to him. So that's kind of prevenient grace in a nutshell. Did have a question. Somebody asked, does prevenient grace mean that you're forgiven for all your sins even without asking for forgiveness? The answer to that is no. Prevenient grace is what makes it possible for us to come to God and even make the decision to turn to God at all. I was kind of thinking, again, all analogies break down at some point, but I was thinking about like if you're driving down a highway and you're going to, let's say Hershey Park, or you wanted to go to Hershey Park. If you're driving down the highway, prevenient grace is kind of like the signs on the side of the road that say, Hershey Park, turn right. Hershey Park, next right. Hershey Park, it's this one, get off now. And then the actual exit ramp that's there so that you're able to get off. That's kind of the idea there. Prevenient grace is what makes it possible for us to get off of the direction that we were going and to turn towards God. So if I'm already forgiven and following Christ, what does this mean for me? Well, I really liked that Melissa pointed out on Sunday she said, it means that we can know and trust that just as God worked in our lives to draw us to him, we can also trust that he's working out things in the lives of people that we know, people that we love, people that we care about and pray for, people that are struggling, people that are far from God. We can trust that he is still reaching out, still loving on them the way that he did us. And so sometimes when you're taking when you think about people that are so far from God and you just worry, just remember that God is still reaching out to them. He is still working in their life. They might not notice it yet. A lot of the times you don't even notice this until after the fact. So just trust and just remember that he is still reaching out to them up until the point that they die, really. God is constantly chasing people down. She made reference on Sunday to the hound of heaven. Like, he does not give up on people. So that's what we can take away from that if we've already accepted Christ. If you haven't, just know that God is still reaching out to you. He wants you to turn back to him. And so how do we respond then to God's prevenient grace? Pastor Melissa is going to be talking about that this Sunday, so make sure you tune in for the live stream at the harbor. And then, obviously, we'll talk about that after. So that's it for Theology Chat with Chumpy this week. I hope you all enjoyed that and got something out of it. And I guess we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Hopefully without the echo. Bye-bye.